Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the July meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at North Norfolk District Council. So, welcome, as I said, to everyone, and in particular to Harriet, who's joined us from Reefham Sixth Form, I understand. So I guess we better be on our best behaviour so that the best of messages goes back to Reefham, hopefully, and you'll hopefully learn something from your observations today. Good to have you in attendance. Right, the first matter on our agenda is to receive apologies for absence.
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Nigel Housden.
Thank you. Any substitutes?
No, I do note that we had Mike Hankins appointed to the committee, I believe, yesterday, but I'm not sure if he's attending today. So we may have his apologies.
Probably too short notice, I imagine.
Sorry, yes, I understood that was after the next full council. So yeah, thank you.
Right. Okay. Let's get the formalities right. Item 3, public questions and statements.
None received.
Thank you. Item 4 is the minutes from the last meeting. That's the meeting we held on the 14th of June. We go through them for accuracy, please. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Does anybody have any observations in regard to the accuracy of the minutes? Can I have a proposer and a seconder then that we accept them? Yeah, I got Councillor MacDonald, and I saw another one. Yeah, Councillor Fisher. Can I have a show of hands then, please, to accept those minutes? Okay, yes, thank you. That looks unanimous. Thank you. Item 5 is items of urgent business.
None received.
Thank you. Item 6 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that we have in respect to the business that we have listed before us today? And we've got the guidance notes in our papers pack. Any interest to be declared? No. Thank you. Item 7 is petitions from members of the public.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Item 8 is consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member.
None received.
Thank you. Item 9 is responses of the council or the cabinet to committee reports or recommendations.
Just to note there, as listed on the agenda, that the purchase of additional waste vehicles was approved at full council in the June meeting.
Okay, thank you. Right, turning then to item 10. Item 10 is the 2022/23 outturn report. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. The report sets out in quite good detail what our position is for the 22/23 financial year. It is much better than expected. When we reflect back on period 6, I believe it was, where we predicted a deficit of around 900,000. We're clearly not in that position now. I just want to bring members' attention to page 30, 5.2, where we put the surplus from the previous financial year into the general reserve to offset the impacts we believe were coming from inflation. And I'm sure members will be pleased to know we won't need the full 616,000 that we put in the reserve. We only will need the 261. So we're in a much better position than we thought we were going to be. The other thing that I wanted to just bring to members' attention would be the 500,000 for net zero initiatives. and the 250,000 to be moved for temporary accommodation. That is point H and point I on the recommendations.
Okay. Thank you. Officer Stankley, would you wish to add anything to the Cabinet members' comments?
Just also to say that within the report at section 6, we give the outturn position for the capital programme, which shows that there was quite a significant underspend against the budget. We had a budget of 16.3 million, the original budget, and the expenditure was 6.8. There are reasons for this. Slippage, delays in awards of contract and that sort of thing. It's quite common that we have a slippage in our capital programme, and this is carried forward though into the following year. And also that the next report, the Treasury Management Report, there's a link between the capital outturn position and the Treasury Management position.
Okay, thank you. Any questions then in respect of the outturn report? Councillor Cushy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of questions, if I may. I note that the shortfall for business rates is 0.61 K. Are we anticipating that the money will be we'll actually get that money in at a later date, or is that a genuine shortfall?
Through you, Chair. That is a fluctuation in income. It'll just be a shortfall in income that we've received in the year as businesses close and open. Yeah, that's natural sort of fluctuation that we would see.
Thank you, that's fine. I just want to focus on the fact that actually the overspend this year actually is 0.782 million, not as inferred, just focusing on the lower figure on the revenue side, which is the 0.261 million. The other question I suppose I have is really around the point you made with regard to the capital projects and with the variation in terms of the actuals versus the forecast. Do we at any point, because we have actually during the year, I think you said we have about sort of 3 iterations when we get updates of the project. Do we actually have the opportunity to reforecast those? Because that is a sizable variation. In my world, when we used to forecast these things, we used to expect that sort of 3 months out, we'd have a very exact, you'd expect to have a very precise expectation of what the estimates will be. Up to 6 months, obviously it will vary a little bit more, but anything beyond that obviously could be wildly out of kilter. Well, I'm looking down the list that we had down there. So for example, we've got the Fakenham Urban Extension, which is something, as you members will appreciate, being a Fakenham member, close to my heart, but we've known for a long time that that wasn't going to proceed last year. So I'm wondering why it stayed in the figures and wasn't moved forward earlier than that, for example.
Who wants to lead on that?
So the capital programme obviously reflects the council's aspirations and ambitions, but these are complex projects to deliver. This table 3 on page 33 shows where there has been some slippage or retained capital budget. Each will have reasons for delay. In terms of the specific large items, Councillor Cushing's referred to the Fakenham Urban Extension. This is where the district council has pledged £900,000 and there is match funding from the Norfolk Business Rates Pool and the Norfolk Development Fund. The timing of the works to provide, that's for a roundabout on the A148 to provide access into the large urban extension of 900 additional homes and 7 hectares of employment land. The works can only be scheduled during the autumn and winter period from October to April each year because that corridor is a principal tourist route. So the county council isn't supportive of traffic management schemes in the form of traffic lights on that corridor during the peak period. And whilst there has been a focus through the Director of Place and Climate Change on trying to bring that scheme forward, because of the issue of nutrient neutrality, that issue has been further delayed. The other two very large items of expenditure on the list, Cooma Coast Protection Scheme and Munsley refurbishment of coast defences, they have received conditional or first stage approval and funding from the Environment Agency, but due to significant cost inflation in construction contract management, a further report on those two schemes is due to be brought back to council in September of this year.
I understood the thrust of your report was whether or not, sorry, your question was whether or not we could have updates across the year, accepting that those forecasts.
Yeah.
Is that?
If I could, yes, the capital programme, we have had, as I'm sure you're all aware, a vacancy within the team. We've appointed recently, promoted the accountancy assistant to our technical accountant, and he will be focusing far more heavily on the detail of the capital programme and working with service managers that are delivering on these projects to provide, as you say, more up-to-date forecasts, which we'll look at including in the budget monitoring reports that we're bringing forward for this year. So we will get the best position known at the time when we're producing the budget monitoring reports and update the capital programme accordingly.
Does that answer your question?
It does. I think it's something this committee going forward ought to focus on, Mr. Chairman, because reforecasting estimates is something that ought to really be a key measure. I think the nearer we get to them, then it's something that they ought to be fairly accurate. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think what Mr. Blatch has explained is perfectly understandable, and that's the rationale behind it. I think it's really a matter of when you look at the bald figures, so to speak, there is a 50% inaccuracy in the estimating, and I wonder if we can just do something as you have described to update us during the course of the year so that we know that those forecasts are either accurate, or if they're not accurate for the reasons that Mr. Blatch has given or others, then we will be kept apace with that. So that would be helpful if you're able to do that across the year. Thank you. Councillor Shires, you're looking quizzical, or am I just observing?
No. I just wanted clarification, because obviously if we cast our minds back to the end of last year, any forecast that we would have done would have been completely inaccurate because we didn't expect the effects on the economy that the previous Prime Minister had. So I understand your reasons for doing it, but it's only as accurate as the current financial and economic climate. So is it just a case of you want regular checks to make sure that the costings for future projects are accurate, or is it that you want to know that any one time it's affordable?
Councillor Cushing.
If I may, we get numbers presented to us at least 3 times a year that we get a review of the latest position on the predicted outturn for the spend of the council. What I'm saying is, as part of those reviews, then you should update the forecast, because anything, as I said, more than 6 months out could indeed be inaccurate. And for example, the Fakenham extension, I fully understand the reasons why that was pushed back. So it wasn't a criticism of that, but the fact is estimates should be as accurate as we can make them, because otherwise we end up in a position where we are today, where if we look at our capital programme, we have a massive discrepancy between what was a forecast and what was actually spent. Now, if those figures had been updated, say, I don't know, for the last cut before we had this report, I suspect they'd have been considerably more accurate. So I'm trying to be helpful, really, then, Councillor Charles.
Does that make sense? Yeah, it is about just trying to perfect the process and make sure that we are more current in understanding where we are with forecasting. Forecasting is a bit of an art, but it's based on the best information you have available to you at the time. And across the year, you will receive more information that will enable you to update it. And it's really a matter of just seeing those updates as they are known. Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. I've got an observation and 2 questions, if that's all right.
I'm sorry?
I have an observation and 2 questions. Is
Yes,
that okay?
that's far away. There's nobody else waiting at the moment. So
So my
floor is
observation,
yours.
my observation is that 781k ain't much different from 900k actually. So I'm not hugely reassured by the improvement that we've made there. The first question is the 261,000 overspend coming out of the general reserve of 2.6 mil. I mean, how long is the general reserve going to last if we continue to overspend like that and without control? That's my first question. Second question is, could we have an executive summary, much like we do have on page 75 for the Treasury report? Because this is a very unwieldy report, and no criticism of anybody, but there's a lot of information. It's very difficult to digest. And it would be much nicer if we could have it encapsulated on a page. And also it'd be quite helpful to have trends, because we've got some lovely trends of the dollar versus the pound and all sorts of lovely steps and bright colours and things like that. But we don't have a lot of trends of what we're doing. And that would be really good if we could have over a couple of years the movement of, say, the General Reserve, how it's changing. Or those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Shires.
So you're, just so that I completely understand, your first question is about, sorry, the question that you raised last was about the way that we present the information on the General Reserve over previous years, so we can check the health of the General Reserve.
Do you want to?
Sorry, sir, I do apologise. It was more general than that. I'd like that all the information in this report encapsulated in an executive summary, so that we don't need to read quite so many pages and cross-reference numbers. And it would be much easier for those of us that aren't financial wizards to grasp what's happening. So it's not just the reserves, it's the whole picture. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. If the committee is so minded, I'm sure that we can review the way that we present information in the outturn report in terms of a summary. And then the other question was about the future use of general reserves.
It was a question about the soundness, I suppose, of dipping into general reserves to pay for overspends more than the actual reserves. It's just, if it was my personal finances, I'd be uncomfortable. And I'm just trying to steward the finance of the public here. And I'm not entirely convinced that we're sound if we keep on dipping into general reserves. That was the gist of my question.
Okay, no, I completely understand that. I completely understand. So with the surplus from the previous financial year, we could have put it into a different reserve, I guess, called something completely different for the impacts of inflation. I'm not entirely sure of that. Is it because it's the general reserve, or is it because it wasn't earmarked for this specific purpose?
I guess it's because it's general rather than earmarked.
Okay.
Ms.
Steve?
Fletch.
So I think the council has historically, for many years, had a year-end surplus against the budget approved. And I think last year was the first year for many years, probably at least 5, but might go back further than that, where there was a year-end deficit, and it is appropriate for that deficit to be closed through the use of reserves. And I think when this report was presented last year with a balance of £617,000, there was a conscious decision made to place the money in that reserve in anticipation at that time of rising inflation and the pressures that had been seen in the international economy as a result of the Ukraine war and rapidly rising energy costs at that time. There was then further disturbance on the international markets, or the UK's position in that regard, last autumn. And so to close the year end with a 261,000 deficit, notwithstanding the question that was asked and the answer given around the business rates figure, which is still to be adjusted for the reasons which Mrs. Stankley outlined. The use of reserves on a one-off basis to close that gap is not a risk to the authority, and that's what reserves are held for in terms of contingencies, unforeseens. As the chief executive and as the Section 151 officer, we wouldn't be recommending that you do that on an annual basis. There is a requirement for officers across and budget holders across the authority to be mindful of cost pressures and efficiencies, and Mrs. Stankley is leading that conversation with budget holders at this present time, and that will be reflected in the work that is done with Cabinet and this committee during the autumn to set a budget for 24-25 in February of next year. So in terms of one-off position, Councillor Holliday, I don't think the committee should be unduly concerned, but it isn't a sustainable position into the future. And so in that respect, the point you raise is valid and well made, and it is incumbent upon both the administration and the officer team to pare down that potential deficit moving forward.
That's thank you very much indeed. That's very helpful. But it's an indication that there's trends, and the presented summarised would be quite helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I've no problem with supporting Councillor Holliday's suggestion for bar chart trend diagrams on the general reserve, etc. And perhaps we should have one for whether there's a surplus or a deficit at the end of each year, if we're going to want to be clearer and more illustrative and make it easier for members, so that we can see, as the chief executive just said, that in most years we have a surplus and not a deficit. Maybe that might be a comfort for Councillor Holliday.
Yeah, I think the point you're making is probably similar in a way to the point that Councillor Holliday is making, in the sense that these reports are quite complex. And I can tell you that I had a conversation with Officer Stankley only yesterday, which explored the possibilities of presenting not only the information in this report, but in one or two other reports that feed and link directly into it, so that we see a more holistic picture in a bit of a simplified form. Because let me be the first to say that I do not understand all the technicalities that there are in the paper. And I doubt if I'm the only one in this council chamber in that position. And it is important that we do understand some very basic fundamentals. There are some really important metrics, and we should know what they are, and we should be able to understand the dynamics around those. Not the technicalities into the difference between gross and net, and whether this has been factored into that or whatever have you. So I think there is a conversation that we need to have, and we started that yesterday. And I think we will be looking to have a training session that will, maybe it'll be a workshop come training session that will enable us to address that problem. And I think what you're looking for in terms of an executive summary may be possible to grow out of that. But I do believe it's really important that we should have the information in a way that we as lay people, I'm sorry if there are any accountants in the room, but amongst us councillors, but speaking for myself, I'm a lay person, and I do need that information to be presented at a level of complexity that I can understand. And that's a responsibility that not only we have as an overview and scrutiny, but every single councillor has a joint and several responsibility for the financial health of the authority. And there is a meeting once a year for full council when we have to consider the full accounts and other reports, and we all have an individual responsibility. So it's not just about looking to the cabinet member, looking to the officer. It is about taking some of that responsibility ourselves to make sure that we are confident and we feel assured about the really important metrics that are, important to us. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, interesting conversation. One of the first things I mentioned to Matt and to Faye, our internal auditor, was actually we need to simplify this stuff. We need to make it understandable. I'm a part qualified accountant in that I did all the theory for ACCA, but it is difficult for people to find their way through it, and we do need to make. So I'm happy to join you on that journey as the chairman of GRAC to see that we can make something that is not too onerous on officers. We need to understand that, but also that is much more beneficial for us to understand it, to enable us to make the right decisions as councillors going forward. So thank you for that. And I look forward to join you on that journey.
Good to hear, Councillor Toy, as chair of GRAC, and you'll have your hustles with the full accounts later in the year. Yeah, I think that there is a common, common aim and ambition here. Other questions in relation to this report? No? Okay, if that is the case, then the recommendations are set out A, B, C, D. Oh, we've got 2 Ds there. I hadn't recognised that. Anyway, D and D, E and F, G, H, and I. Without reading them out individually, do I have a proposer to accept those recommendations, and a seconder, please? Councillor Penfold and Councillor Boyle. Can I have a show of hands then to accept those recommendations? Okay, that looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 11. And item 11 is the Treasury Outturn Report for 2022-23. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members. Just reflecting on what was said about the previous report, whilst I feel that this is a much clearer report, it's possibly the best set out treasury management outturn report that I've seen. I'm happy to receive comments from the committee about the understandability of it. Obviously, if you're not from a financial background, it is tricky to get to grips with. I understand that. So I'm really interested in that because I want everybody to really understand what we're doing with taxpayers' money all the time. So if we can't understand, then I'm happy to work with officers to rectify that. I just want to thank our in-house accountancy team and obviously Mrs. Stankley for the work that's been done to keep our treasury as healthy as it is. We are in 2 ways. We're benefiting from the increases in interest rates. We're seeing that and I say that lightly because I know that our residents are really struggling with that. So it's double-edged really in terms of how the current financial situation is benefiting us. We can see that we are in a healthy position in terms of investment versus borrowing. But I really just want to make very clear that while we're seeing income from our investment, I know that many people in North Norfolk are suffering from the interest rates, specifically our homeowners. So I'm happy to take any questions. I note that my excitement for this report at Cabinet was not met with equal excitement from colleagues, so I will try and keep my inner excitement over the technicalities of this report, and I'll take any questions.
Okay, Officer Stankley, would you wish to add anything to that?
Yes, I'll be the first to say that this, I think, is the most technical report that you have before you during the year, are the Treasury Management strategy, the mid-year report, and then this outturn report. It is full of a lot of technical jargon. And the reason for this is that we are self-regulating in terms of our treasury management at the moment. The government acknowledge that CIPFA, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, produce a code which local authorities agree to follow and comply with, and that we regulate ourselves by doing this. If we don't do this, then the government will sort of impose regulation upon us, and that's why we do this. And as part of that self-regulation, we agree to produce a report in a certain format and provide certain information, and that's why we have a template that we get from our treasury management advisors, and we produce this information so that we're all being consistent across the board, and the government can see that we are complying with the code that we have. I think just on page 76, there's the executive summary, which does set out the sort of the most important point, I think, that you need to take away from having read this report, and that's a capital expenditure. This is where it links through to the outturn report, that top line. We see the 6.862 million, and that's what we actually spent in the year. And then it sets out what our capital financing requirement is. With capital expenditure, we finance it either through capital receipts, revenue funds, or grants during the year at the point of expenditure. And then anything that's left is financed through borrowing. And that is what the capital finance requirement is. It's the residual sort of indebtedness that we have as an authority. So we've been funding that through internal borrowing, which is essentially using our cash. So our investments will reduce, and there'll be a point at time in which we'll need to replenish that cash and take some external borrowing to replenish our cash. Looking at, this is always taken at a point in time. So looking at the total investments, you can see that as at the 31st of the 3rd, 22, we had 45 million invested. And you might think that when you're looking then at the following year, at the same time, but for 23, we've got 27 million. That's quite a significant drop. But that is the 31st of the 3rd, 22 takes into account the fact that we were holding a lot of COVID grants that we knew that we would have to repay back to the government. And we repaid that during the year. And that's why we see such a significant drop. We did have a substantial amount we were holding that hadn't been utilised for whatever reason. And that is really all I wanted to say, to bring your attention to in the report. And as we had our discussion yesterday, we said that we would include some trends going forward and provide information, hopefully in a simpler format, so that it would be a bit easier to understand. But we do still have to produce this amount of information for our treasury management, though.
Yes, thank you for that. Much of what you've just explained was part of our conversation yesterday morning, because quite honestly, I wasn't quite clear about how to interpret that table. And for an executive summary, because an executive summary should pull out of the main paper the key points that you need to understand. And if I wasn't able to do that to my satisfaction, then I'm not doing my job, and that hence that conversation yesterday. And so I'm clearer about what that table means, but I do believe that it goes back to the conversation we had with regard to the last item, and that is about how we can improve our understanding. Well, how can we improve the presentation of information so that we can improve our understanding about the key indicators that demonstrate the health, the financial health of the authority. And I think that's what we would want to do for the future. However, we are where we are in respect of the report today. Any questions? Councillor Cushing.
Not such a question as an observation, because obviously Stankley obviously has pointed out the the obvious question to be asked there, which was around the COVID grant, which I think some of us knew about anyway. But I think it probably would have been helpful just to have a bullet point down there explaining the reason why we had such a significant reduction over the course of the year, and probably bullets for anything else which is sort of clearly obvious would help.
Councillor Shires?
I didn't hear the tail end of what you said, Councillor Cushing. Apologies.
What I said is Councillor Stankley pointed out the obvious question, which was around the reduction in investments over the course of the year. It just would have been helpful to have a bullet point in there explaining why that was the case. I think those of us who've been on this committee for a long while knew about the COVID grant anyway, so that wasn't actually a surprise to us, but obviously new members here wouldn't know that. So I think that would be something that would be helpful. And not only that, but any other obvious points on there, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, okay, that's absolutely fine. I think that touching on what has been said already, it's going to be very useful to me actually, for the committee to have a really good grip on the financial reports coming forward, to keep me focused more so on how members are viewing our finances. And as that critical friend that I see the Overview and Scrutiny Committee as. So whatever we need to do in terms of simplification, clarification, layout, I'm more than happy for us to do that. And any of the training that you want, you've got my full buy-in and support to do that, because the more people that understand where we're headed, the stronger the questions that I will get as well. And that's really beneficial for me.
Councillor Stankley.
Just coming back on the training point, Link Asset Services, who are our Treasury Management Advisors, recently appointed as from the 1st of April in a tendering exercise, are excellent at providing training, and I think they will provide Treasury Management training twice a year. It's usually at a time and delivered when there's a GRAC meeting. It's usually for the audit committee, but it is always open to all members. I've worked at several authorities where I've attended the training as part of attending audit committee, and it's very worthwhile.
Just picking up on your point, Councillor Shires, about presentation and so forth. I think we start from the position that we get this kind of report in the format that it is, because it has to meet those requirements, and that's a given. So that's not what the challenge is about. I think the challenge is more about how do we pull out of not only this report and the one we've just considered, but there will be others that we can pull out key indicators, key figures that will be important to, as I said before, understanding the health of the organisation, not just at this particular instant in time. And when you look at the table on page 76, it gives two snapshots. And I'm sure those snapshots are accurate. But when you look at the differences between the figures within those snapshots, that does pose questions. And I think the point that Councillor Cushing has made is that where there is a big change or a significant factor that's in there, then maybe a note to that effect is very helpful to understand, because it answers much of that particular query. But I think, and this is for another time, it might be possible to put like an executive summary together, which encompasses a number of indicators from a number of reports that collectively gives that holistic picture that you can say, yeah, I understand this, and we don't want to drill down into too much detail.
If I can just come back on that. I completely get that. My paperwork at the moment is full of all the linking information to get that picture and to make sure that I've got all the detail for myself. How we can help build that picture going forward is going to be possibly more challenging, because people benefit from information in different ways. But I'm more than happy to try and bring everybody into the same space of understanding with where we're going and where we've been in terms of our finances. The more people that understand this, the better.
Well, I'm sure you'll be a key part of that conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Holiday.
Okay, I'm sure the answer to this is very obvious. By the way, I think this report's smashing. If you could do the same for the outturn, I'd be very happy. Thank you. Why are we borrowing when we've got quite a lot of money stashed away? Is it because the interest rate differential?
Councillor Spankley. Oh, or Councillor Shires, of course. Who wants to take that?
I kind of feel like, it's cash flow purposes. That's the only reason why. We have fluctuations during the year, things such as council tax and business rates where we're only collecting for 10 months. So, you know, historically, I think if you look back over years, which again comes back to trends, and it is at a given point in time. So we often need to borrow a little bit over the year end short term because we don't get any income coming through for the last 2 months of the financial year. And that's why we quite often take that little bit. And it is short term, yeah.
Any other questions? Are we all done? The recommendation before us is that Cabinet reviews and approves this report with the recommendation that it is submitted to full council for final approval. Can I have a proposer and a seconder then for that, please? Councillor Penfold and Councillor Fisher. Can I have a show of hands then to that recommendation? That looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much indeed. Turning to item 12. Item 12 is the corporate plan for 2023 through to 2027. Councillor Adams.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to those around the room for contribution to both this process and work, and separately to the content of our corporate plan. The plan, of course, reflects our manifesto commitments and priorities as discussed with numerous residents and others across the district. The administration was returned on the principles outlined. And separately, we recognise the key challenges and opportunities ahead for both the council and the district. These considerations are reflected within the emerging corporate plan, which will guide the authority over the next 4 years. A significant change on this administration's plan and how it translates into delivery is that we are intending on producing an annual action plan rather than a delivery plan for the 4 years. And this will provide both the agility we require to respond to different challenges and to also realise opportunities more readily. It will also provide more opportunity for the council as a whole to shape actions in the years ahead, though perhaps also more challenge for this committee to become more agile to respond to this and consider for discussion and review the contextual measures with some greater frequency to consider they are appropriate, and to ensure you're covering a cross-section of the council's work. Work is being undertaken to consider the appropriate contextual measures already, which you will need to obviously consider following the imminent approval of the local plan. Obviously, for newer members, they haven't been through that process of selecting those exactly yet, but we have been looking at those at this committee over the past few months. The process is covered in greater detail between the front page of this report and page 106, outlining also where it goes next and how your comments today will be dealt with. You will see continuities as expected from the previous council and projects already underway in the annual action plan draft. Our themes set out our commitment to the environment and net zero goals, to housing, our communities, including rural localities and towns, youth and sport, to business, including very significant considerations from Bacton to bank hubs, and also maintaining robust governance and responsible use of revenue and resources. I'm happy to cover in much greater detail in this session on the content, but I'll do that at the discretion of the committee, because obviously that would take quite a few more minutes, but I'm very happy to do that. But you know, that's fine. I'm happy to do what you want me to do there. Obviously, this does go to full council as well. But just to say, I look forward to working with the council as a whole and this committee in meeting those objectives, and I suppose observing the council's performance in this context in reaching them too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mr. Blatch, do you wish to say anything at this point?
No, thank you, Chair. This is an aspiration of the administration. Officers have provided support and advice and guidance in the development of the document thus far. And we're interested in receiving your comments and hopefully the endorsement of full council. And in terms of the future development of the action plan for 24-25, there are workshops proposed in September, and bringing that back for pre-scrutiny in October.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for that. A couple of points just from me. It's obviously good that we're considering this in July, when we last time around 4 years ago, it was much later in the year. So it's so much good, it's much appreciated that we're seeing this at an earlier point in the administration. One fairly obvious question I have for you. I'm mindful that last time you had 6 themes in your corporate plan. And I see you've got 5 this time. And the one deficiency that I see, and Councillor Shires, I'm sure, will be most interested in this. Last time you had, and I'm not sure that I got the precise wording right, but I think you had financial sustainability as one of your themes last time. And I'm very mindful that there are challenges that we have in the medium-term financial strategy that are no less now than they were last time. In fact, they may be more so now than they were last time. So the obvious question for me, and bearing in mind the priority and the importance that we place on financial sustainability, and we've been talking about that quite a lot this morning so far, I would have thought that you would have wanted to have financial sustainability as one of your key themes.
Was that a question? Can I come in there? Is it?
My
Is that
question to you.
Well, sure.
Have
It
you
seems to be
thought
more
that one
addressed to Lucy,
through?
but that's fine. No, that's okay. Well, first of all, yes, you know, we are further ahead in the calendar, indeed, than other Norfolk local authorities. I suppose this is part of the benefit of having, you know, administration coming back in. I believe there was rather a lot more work to be done by the previous administration when they took control of the council, things hidden under rocks, etc. So I think that explains, you know, we've obviously been able to prioritize this, and we've certainly wanted to do that. So thank you for the compliment. Obviously, we did look at a number of different options for themes, and indeed, you know, we did have drafts where there were 6, but we feel we've covered that part of considerations within this. So certainly, even if it's not explicit, you know, there will be considerations in the annual action plan. Obviously, you know, we've got to have sustainable finances moving ahead, and there are different things within there you might want to pick out. But yeah, absolutely. But I don't think we necessarily need a standalone. We've obviously got a strong, responsible and accountable council as a theme. I don't think we also need a sustainable financial, I don't know what you call the theme, because we didn't name one, of course, but that's where we are. We're very happy with the themes that we've selected. We feel there's there's more than enough high level content within there. Obviously, you'll have the individual actions within the annual action plan. Thank you.
Okay, I understand your response. But clearly those 5 that you've got listed, the delivery of those relies very much on the financial sustainability of the organisation. And I accept your point about a strong, responsible and accountable council as being implicit, that includes financial as well. But last time around, and I agree with this, you felt that it was a worthy theme to have in it on its own, and it probably demonstrates a level of awareness and importance that I would have thought that you would want to have, bearing in mind the challenge is no less, as I said, is probably greater now than it was then. I would have thought that would have been a very good 6th theme to give consideration to. Can I leave that one with you to ponder? I've got Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It would be remiss of me not to make a comment at this point, because I think as I look round the chamber, I'm the only member who was in the cabinet 4 years ago, and my only regret is that I didn't go down to Ladbrokes and put a bet on that. But I didn't. So as Councillor Adams has touched upon, the situation in this particular month, at this point in this administration, is completely different to the same point 4 years ago. We inherited well, shambles of an
I'm
administration.
going to stop you at that point, Councillor Brown. I'm quite happy to take questions, but I don't think it's helpful to go back. That's the past. We've had many debates in here about that.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, with respect, you have taken us back. You've raised the point of why there isn't a 6th point in our manifesto, in our corporate plan proposal, but for financial sustainability.
I'm not going to accept an analysis of the past to that degree. Make your point and make it concisely. And if you've got a question, then please a question, but I don't want to hear a political statement.
Well, I was hoping I wouldn't have to refer to the political situation 4 years ago, but I'm afraid that is the reality. And we've now got, after 4 years of the administration we've just experienced, if you don't want me to refer to anything politically, I won't. We do have more sustainable and sound finances. We have made investments across the district without recourse to borrowing. We've a temporary deficit for a very good reason, but I'm sure that we'll move into a surplus fairly soon. And for that reason, I think that we can take it as read that there will be some financial sustainability in this corporate plan, given what we're wanting to achieve and how this administration has been run. And of course, the residents have let us know recently that they are very happy with the way this administration operates.
Let me just respond to that, if I may. You said initially the situation is completely different now than it was 4 years ago. I don't think that's quite correct. And I think that if you look at the medium-term financial strategy, that's your first piece of evidence that shows that the challenge now is, as I've said already, probably greater now in closing that gap than it was then. So to that extent, that particular element is the one that I'm focusing on here. And you may think that the situation is completely different. I would say in respect of financial sustainability, the situation is exactly the same, and arguably worse. But the second point I'd like to make is, yes, I agree with you, financial sustainability will be looked at in detail during the course of this administration in all the business that we do, because every piece of business that comes through this committee will be looked at with that particular responsibility in mind. That's what part of our range of duties. I'm sorry if you don't feel that financial sustainability is worth putting in as a theme. That's clearly a matter for you collectively to decide upon. And it was only a proposal, a suggestion, one that I would have thought that you would want to give some thought to. Anyway, that's my response. I've got Councillor Shires and Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm happy that finance is the centre stage of the conversation again. And I fear, and I'm welcoming of that being everything going forward. I don't mind taking most of the airtime, as I'm sure you can imagine, Mr. Chairman. When we look at page 115 with the strong, responsible and accountable council, those are words that resonate with our residents and they have a good understanding of what they mean. The opening sentence where we talk about maintaining a financially sound position, making best use of assets and resources, and maximising opportunities for external funding and income. People understand what that means. We've sat in this chamber previously with the previous corporate plan where it was criticised because it wasn't clear enough. We've been very, very clear in what we're attempting to do here. So there shouldn't be any grey areas. If we go to the central column of effective and efficient delivery, everybody in this room knows I hate the word delivery because it doesn't mean anything to a normal person outside of a corporate world, unless you're waiting for a package to come to the door. If we look at effective and efficient delivery, where we've got managing finances, contracts robustly, best value for money, efficiently delivered services, again, the word delivery, which I don't like, value for money, meeting the needs of residents, strong governance, ambitious and motivated workforce. That is everything that financial sustainability is. I don't believe that we have neglected finances from this corporate plan, and I don't think it's fair of you to suggest that the financial sustainability of the council isn't one of our priorities, because it absolutely is. And I'm sure my cabinet colleagues are sick of me asking how much they think things are going to cost and where we're getting the money from for such things. But that is more of a reflection on perhaps our feelings as to what we want to deliver, rather than the perception of this committee currently, who I know have just stated that the financial reports are too difficult to understand. So if we can't get the financial reports in a way which is easier for the committee to understand, financial sustainability and holding us to account on that is not going to be easy for this committee to do. So we've set out very clearly in the corporate plan how we want to be held accountable for this. I hope that offers some clarification, but please don't think that financial sustainability is not going to be my passion for the foreseeable future.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Perish the thought. I would be most worried if it was. The point I was really making was not so much that I didn't believe that it wasn't a priority for you, because I think we would take it for granted that it will be a priority, because there'll be some quite deep and meaningful discussions within this chamber if things are not right. It's about how you promote that, the message that you send out. But I've said enough. Councillor Adams.
Well, broadly, I was going to say the same thing as Lucy. In that I do
That'll
believe,
shorten the conversation.
I do believe we already have this as a corporate plan theme. You look under the section of strong, responsible and accountable council. Lucy's discussed there we will ensure the council maintains a financially sound position, but besides that, we're also looking at investing in projects which deliver returns, reviewing our car parking management contracts and other contracts to ensure we are realizing all of the revenue that we should be, and filling our assets, etc., our commercial properties. So I would say all of that is there within the themes, and I'm comfortable that it is. And I also just wanted to say, obviously, in the last council, we delivered significant works at Pier, the Heritage Action Zone works ongoing, the toilets, the roof swimming pool, and then also face dramatic levels of inflation, increase in staff costs, energy costs, and we've maintained a sustainable position. Of course, we've had to dip into reserves, of course, but who wouldn't? And we're one of the very few councils that aren't in a significant amount of debt. So I think we've already demonstrated our commitment previously to being in a financially sustainable and robust position in terms of governance and accountability. So and certainly responsibility. And that's certainly something we're committing to in future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Enough said. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I do like the word sustainable, I have to say, but I would say that as I'm the chairman of the Sustainable Communities Fund. But I think people do understand it. I think it is a word that is out there and people kind of know what it means. So I think whilst it is in here, I do take your point about it perhaps being made more obvious, perhaps in the way that this plan is written. And I'm looking at page 115 in particular. And I think it is in there, but I'm not sure the word itself is. So for me, I'm not sure quite. When we say a strong, responsible and accountable council, I'm assuming that means a financially strong council. I'm not quite sure whether that word strong is necessary there. If it were me, it would be something like sustainable, responsible and accountable. I know that's a lot of bulls, but and then we're talking about financially sound. For me, to strengthen that, financially sustainable would be better. But so I'm not quite sure what the strong element is, and I would replace that with sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would reiterate the points that you've made in terms of that. If the Conservative Party have won the election and we've put in corporate plan together, something like financial sustainability would have been actually probably the very heart of a corporate plan. And for this reason, for the last 4 years, I've been banging on about the medium-term financial forecast, which you mentioned. And every year going forward, it shows significant deficits for this council. And when I first started it, the then Councillor Seward, who I had a lot of respect for, said, don't worry about it. As time got nearer, actually, he did start worrying about it. And this year, we've seen the first year where we've actually seen an overspend. Going forward, things only get harder. We can't just simply, I believe, sit back and really expect government always to supply us with grants and funding. The whole public sector financing is going to get tight going forward under whatever complexion of government we have going forward. That will be the case. So it's really a question to me is what can this council do to help itself? And that should be at the heart of what we be looking at in terms of that. And there are lots of things you could look at doing that. Collaborative working with other councils. We've seen that with the waste collection contract. There may be other opportunities there. I don't know, but that's something that we'd have been keen to explore. Councils can do two things with finances. You can actually invest and your money to get more money in. That's easier said than done. And I would certainly never be an advocate of investing money on any risk-based approach. The other side is, well, what can we do to make ourselves more efficient? And I think there's nothing in here that I can see about wanting to make this council more efficient. You may well say it's in the wording there somewhere, but I think it ought to be explicit in there. The other thing I have a slight concern about is, or say a major concern about, is the lack of long-term objectives. I understand that effectively, where would this council want to be in April of 2027 when it's next up for renewal? And they're the sort of the outturn objectives that you're aiming for. The actions that you have every year lead to the achievement of that outcome. Without seeing what sort of the end picture looks like, it's hard to keep judging what the actions are. And I think that's something that would benefit, the corporate plan would benefit from having as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Adams, you to respond.
Well, yes, there was quite a lot in that, but what I would say is I wouldn't get too hung up about theme names. because what I've discovered is certainly if you go to 20 different people, you will get 20 different responses on what they want individual themes to be called. So I'm confident that the issues that you've talked about in terms of efficiency, in terms of sustainability are there. They might not be the exact words you individually would have used, but it is there in our corporate plan. So I don't want to dwell on that much longer. I think Christopher raises a good point, looking at some of the crises, frankly, that are happening at other councils who have overinvested in certain assets and projects, and to the tune of billions of pounds, not millions. It's obviously not the space we ever want to be in. So certainly I can give my commitment to that not being the case. So that said, we've got work to do with our own property portfolio. We do have opportunities, we have good revenue streams, and it's ensuring we are getting what we should be out of those for the most part in terms of the revenues. We still have some very challenging empty properties that are in some cases liabilities. They can't really be seen as a source of income, but it would be good to have them filled. We've obviously got car parks, beach huts, and other locations that give us an income, and we need to look at those in a bit greater detail. There will be, obviously, within the corporate plan, let's start again. Within the corporate plan, it's high level. The annual action plan will have the individual targets. So I think this is one perhaps difference from the last corporate plan, in that there were lots of targets within the corporate plan itself. We've gone for a high level document that sets the theme, sets the approach, but the individual targets will be in the annual action plan, and that will be a far more agile approach at managing the opportunities as they come in and realizing a lot more. So that's all really I wanted to say. I think we've sort of already dealt with a lot of the points that you've raised in other sessions previously, in fact, when we were looking at the development of the corporate plan. One thing I should also say, that I don't think I have, obviously we're still yet to put in the contextual measures, the graphics, my introduction, and that will obviously be there before the corporate plan is published. So if you're wondering why, it's obviously a black and white document at the moment, albeit with final draft across it in red. That will obviously, it will look considerably different by the time it's published, so that it is an accessible document for residents and others who want to know about our plans for the future, really. So that said, it's probably not a document that's a go-to read for members of the public and businesses in our district frequently. It's certainly something that matters a great deal internally, though, in this council. So and you will obviously be looking at that content and measuring how we are delivering against that on a month-to-month basis. Thank you. That's all I should say.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Shires and then Councillor Holiday.
Thank you. Councillor Cushing, obviously, I know that efficiencies was mentioned in the Conservative manifesto for North Norfolk. But after speaking with residents on the word efficiencies, it's linked with austerity, service cuts, lack of provision, and a loss of belief that the council will be there for them. So I am not keen on using a word that our residents link that to, because
Mr. Chairman, if you're saying residents, you may be speaking to some residents. The residents I've spoken to have certainly not given me that message. That might be what the residents of North Walsham are saying. Certainly wouldn't say that's replicated in Fakenham.
I'll just remind us, please, not to get into a political battle. This is a political committee. Thank you.
Let's have one at a time. So Councillor Shires.
And I would prefer it if I wasn't talked over, because we do go through the chair to speak. So for us, when we were talking about that, It was about how the words that we're using in our corporate plan, which we want our residents to understand, would resonate with them and our relationship with residents. And that was the basis for not using that word. We have got services delivered efficiently in there, but there wasn't any other need to put efficiencies in the corporate plan because it doesn't make our residents, and you're quite right, I have not spoken to every single resident in North Norfolk, but I have travelled out of my own ward to speak to residents across the district. So that was the basis, and the group generally agreed with that from their own experiences.
I don't think we want to get into the finer points of the wording. I think it's the kind of sentiment and the fundamentals underlying that are most important. How you choose to word them is a matter for you. And obviously you've heard quite a bit this morning in terms of, I would hope you would see it as constructive feedback and points to ponder. And I think we'll leave it at that. Councillor Holliday and then Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Chair. I've got observations more than questions, if that's all right. I would say that a strong, responsible and accountable council was absolutely business as usual, and I would be quite offended if that was one of my aspirations, quite frankly. So I think we should take that out. That's what we are. I do think that the people I talk to are interested in well-paid jobs and housing and having their benefits paid. And this feels very intangible. I think the people I talk to want concrete actions. And I know these are going to turn into concrete actions, I hope, but this feels to me very quite loose and vague, and it doesn't meet the needs of the people that I talk to. And there's something that we don't cover at all is rurality. I mean, rurality is hugely expensive. There's a very interesting presentation by the Rural Services Network, I'm sure you all went to, about the cost of rurality and the deprivation of rurality, and we're not really gripping that. And I think that's the most important thing we have is rurality. I know we've got towns, but basically we're rural, and I don't feel we're embracing that with this document at all. And I'll stop there. Okay,
thank you. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just pick up on that point actually about rurality. I'm just looking at the page 107. I think it's really good that in the opening statement it's talking about putting rural villages at the heart of everything we do, or in particular rural villages. They are so important to our communities in North Norfolk. But I'm just wondering if then in the following pages, are we satisfied that we then are, that there's enough in there, if you like, that actually meets that claim on the front page, that if you were a rural villager, you could look at this and think, oh yeah, actually on page 100 and whatever it is, there is something there for me in this rural village that I'm in that does face deprivation and is cut off from everywhere and hasn't had investment and all the rest of it. It probably is, and it's probably in there, but I wonder whether it's specific enough. Perhaps we could just be directed to that, or whether you could sort of point out for us, Tim, where you feel that the sort of rural communities might take heart from this document. Thank you. In particular, the villages.
Okay, so, well, first of all, communities and housing, but there are two separate themes there. I feel we've covered these points. Certainly in our annual action plan, you've got our commitment to deliver a rural strategy. There will be far more focus on rural issues and business in this corporate plan than there were under the last one. So it's something we are keen to develop more and more as a thread. We did think early on about having an individual rural theme, decided that wasn't appropriate and that it should be in the corporate plan as a whole. So yeah, I feel rural, issues. Obviously, we've got a lot of opportunities over this year with the funding that's coming through as well to support rural businesses. We are looking at, we're going to agree to have a digital champion as well to support the rural economy in many respects. There's a lot there. Obviously, the issues with benefits, which Councillor Holiday also brought up. So, you know, we've obviously had to work in a very different way since the cost of living crisis, and all the additional attention and our commitment to helping people through the cost of living crisis is also within this corporate plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Toy and then Councillor Holiday, and I'll close the list of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak, because obviously I'm just here as a member today. But I think with what Councillor Holiday said about the strong, responsible, sustainable council actually applies to financial sustainability. It's embedded. It should be embedded, and it has been shown in the things we've been shown this morning, things we've spoken about, making it more understandable for people. So those financial implications are better understood, should be embedded within the council, and therefore through the previous administration, making that focus to get that embedded, I believe that that's how that's dealt with here. So yes, we do need to be financially sustainable. Do we need it out as a separate heading? I personally don't believe so. The rural, I've been on about that for ages, and I've actually been a little chuckle there because they know how much I go on about it. 40% of our residents live in the countryside. And I think that that's, you know, we've got sufficient headings in here to start drilling down. This is the overall plan. And if I wasn't satisfied that it was being delivered, I'd be talking in people's ears. So there is an opportunity here to change some focus. Not that we should take it away from our coastal areas, which are important. They're a lot of our finances are driven from there, and obviously it's a big issue with coastal erosion, but actually we need to take some focus inside. And you know, we've spoken about in the previous administration about emphasizing the facilities and places within the district and not just along the coast. So there's a lot to be done within these headings to drill down. So yeah, I just wanted to add that into the mix, that I think that it's not, the headlines are a set of titles, but it's about what's embedded in there. And it's for those of us through you know, through my armed forces champion, if I thought there was something that wasn't going to benefit, so that the champions within the council are really key people to make sure that as we move forward, as this gets drilled down and expanded and becomes a plan, actually make sure that those things are delivered. So I'm just saying that the headlines are a set of starting points, which some have already said, do they need to be there or not? The question is it embedded in the plan? And I believe so. So thank you.
Okay, I agree with you. I would take that a stage further, actually. The proof of any plan is outcomes and actions. Outcomes. And that's what it's really all about. If you don't have those at the end, all that will have gone before will be to no avail.
Yeah. And if I just may say that's why this is a starting point. We need to say this is the focus for what we believe as an administration, and I sit here as part of that administration, and therefore it's how we develop it from here that will be the important things. Thank you.
Councillor Holiday.
That fits into the performance reporting, doesn't it, really? Because we look at how we're performance reporting against process often, but if you were going to performance report against actions, that would be much more satisfactory. So that's something to take away. I was just going to say the key actions strike me as a little bit unaspirational. I mean, some of these have been done or are well underway, and like providing the solar carport at the reef, for example, and local plan examinations underway, and coastwise is well begun. So I feel that we could perhaps stretch ourselves a little bit more in terms of putting down things that we haven't already done. It's a bit like when I do my list of to-dos, I take the bin out at the beginning. But I think we could be a little bit more stretching. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Blanche.
So the document, comments have been made about the timeliness of preparing this document post-election on the 4th of May. Obviously, there is a programme of work which is ongoing during this current year, and that list reflects that in part in terms of the reef and the aspiration around a rural strategy. So you don't have one, but that's something that the administration have said to officers they do wish to see addressed or prepared in this first 12 months. But the purpose of having an inclusive action planning process of workshops in September and bringing forward the conclusions of those discussions in October to pre-scrutiny is so there is a wider ownership and participation in those actions in year 2. So this is a transitional document. It reflects the fact that there was a political mandate given on the 4th of May through a democratic process, and that is that this document is the statement of political intent by the administration in terms of those priorities, and does, because of the continuity across the 2 administrations, there is some work that is in train that will be continued to be delivered. There is now an opportunity for there to be a conversation about new priorities moving forward, and the delivery plan for this year reflects that continuity, but also a change of direction or renewed direction in terms of the commitments made through this new document, particularly around a rural strategy. So I think that ambition that Councillor Holliday has expressed a desire to see can be talked about through those workshops in September, and will be the subject of a substantive conversation, I believe, at this committee at your October meeting. And then it's intended that the actual authority to sign off the action plan sits with Cabinet. It's not a decision for full council. So hopefully through that pre-scrutiny process in September and October, there will be a consensus delivered or developed around the actions for next year. And the resources required to deliver those would then be identified through the budget planning process between November and February.
Thank you for that. Does that help? Thank you. Councillor Adams, as the concluding speaker.
Sorry?
As the concluding speaker.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just keep it very brief. And obviously, I just wanted to say you will see a lot of continuity from the previous council. There's obviously, we have a benefit there in that we were in previous administration. If there was a break, the Conservatives group or the independent group or whoever might have taken control of the council might have an entirely new set of priorities. So yeah, obviously, but I did want to just say these are really very ambitious actions. The solar array at the reef is no mean feat. It's a very big project, and we're trying to deliver obviously a project on that scale every year. It is certainly a challenge. We've obviously been working very hard over the last few years to deliver the local plan, and you can see that that's also an action. The delivery, and I know, sorry, Lucy doesn't like the word delivery, but the commencement of works at Cromer and Munsley for the coastal schemes, they are very large projects, and secure that funding will be a magnificent achievement for the authority. So hopefully that happens. Many councillors have been quite excited about the active environment strategy. That's something very different. That's play equipment, parks, country parks, and continuing our commitment towards green flag status. So there's lots of different things there. The toilet facilities, we've obviously got to deliver Holt soon, or build Holt. I'll remove the word deliver. And we're obviously underway at North Walsham and Sheringham, but obviously we're looking at working towards doing some of the larger villages as well. So there's a lot here year to year. That's all I just wanted to emphasize. And you can only get so much done in a year. This will go very quickly before we're looking at the next action plan. So I look forward to working with you and looking at the themes and how we're delivering upon them over the next 4 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So just bringing this to a close, I think my summary would be that you've heard quite a number of what I would describe as constructive comments and suggestions. I'm not detecting enough support for any of them to bring them forward as a recommendation, unless somebody wants to make a recommendation at this point. So what I would hope you would do would be to take away those comments and feed them into further discussions at future events, and perhaps there might be a way in which they might be adequately reflected in as the document evolves. I don't think a kind of a defensive response is what I was looking for today. I was hoping that we would have a more, what I would call more open-minded discussion. It was really about putting forward proposals, suggestions that would refine and enhance the document more than making definite sort of, yes, we'll run with that, or no, we won't. Anyway, the recommendation that we have before us on this is that we consider the comments upon the comment upon the draft plan as a statement of the council's intent and ambition for the term of the council administration, with any comments being reported to the full meeting of council to be held on the 19th of July. I'm not sure whether it would be in order for some of the comments to be given at that time, but it doesn't actually say recommendations. So we would normally make recommendations, but perhaps a little bit of guidance from you on this might help.
Yes, so thank you, Chair. That's helpful, and thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak on this point. So what we've tried to do in terms of governance is clearly identify the roles and responsibilities of Cabinet and Overview and Scrutiny Committee, because in previous times, you've just received exactly the same report with no clear guidance as to what the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is asked to do. And both myself and the monitoring officer don't think that is sufficiently clear as to your responsibilities. So in reporting this to council next week, either verbally through yourself as chair, it is important that you capture in public the key points that have been made through your discussions. And I conclude that those points are, is there sufficient clarity around the issue of financial sustainability as detailed within the corporate plan? And you know that discussion can play out, or has played out here, and can play out again at full council if people think that is appropriate, or the leader of the council or the portfolio holder can prepare responses in respect of the issues which have legitimately been raised in this conversation. There were then, I think, points around whether the headline objectives are sufficiently ambitious enough, as raised by Councillor Holliday, and whether the issue of rurality, which is a unique, well, not totally unique, but is a fundamental characteristic of North Norfolk compared to many other districts, is sufficiently reflected in the aspirations of this corporate plan. I accept they're my words, but that's the interpretation that I've concluded from the conversations this morning. And I would expect to reflect in the minutes of the meeting and any verbal report that you provide to full council next week in the consideration of this item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Platts. That's very helpful. It puts that kind of into context, and I think the points that you've raised are those that I have equally picked up, and I didn't see them as amounting to any supportable recommendations, but they were certainly matters that I believe needed to be heard in that wider environment. So I will endeavour to do that, and working with the with Matt on the minutes to ensure that they are appropriately incorporated. So the second recommendation notes the arrangements outlined in a series of member workshops in September to contribute to the development of actions proposals for inclusion in the 24-25 annual action plan, and then for the draft action plan being presented as a pre-scrutiny item for discussion agreement at this committee on the 11th of October. Two proposals there, two recommendations there. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Penfold and Councillor Fisher. Can I have a show of hands then to agree with that? Thank you. That looks unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So that's item 12. Moving on to item 13, which is the headline benchmarking report. Councillor Adams, do you wish to lead on this?
Well, I feel I've got little to add further to our discussion at the last meeting, really. I felt that discussion was helpful, and again, I thank staff for producing the report for us today. I mean, that's all I wish to say. We've obviously discussed quite a few of these topics very recently, so I didn't necessarily want to delve into, a lot more detail on them. That said, appreciate Lucy's been doing quite a lot of work on all of this all the time. So really appreciated by the committee and the cabinet. I'm happy to leave it there if that's okay, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything you'd like to say, Officer Wiltshire?
Yeah, I had prepared an introduction just to summarise the data sets. I mean, I can do that if you want.
Well, we can deal with it two ways, I guess. I can open out for questions, and it may be that what you've got will feed into those, or we'll see how it unfolds. Okay, any questions that Councillor Holiday?
Sorry, could you speak your mind?
Sorry, I've got two questions. The first is, could the benchmarking report be included with the performance report instead of contextual report? Or if we can't have all three together, because I find this one much more helpful in reference to the performance report than the contextual report. Not that the contextual report isn't brilliant, but I would prefer to see this, have seen this last time with the performance report. That's my one question. The other question was, is there any learning from our SEPFA colleagues about the fact that we're consistently poor in performance in some of these performance metrics? I mean, for up to 12 periods, we're consistently worse performing. So I just wondered if there's, instead of just reporting that, and there's lots of reasons why we're worse performing, but are there things that we can learn from colleagues who are obviously managing better than I in the same sort of circumstances? So is there any sort of peer learning we could take? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you've, I think, probably raised sort of kind of 3 points there about the sequencing of the reports and whether we should see the 3 together or whether we should see 2 together, and if so, which 2 together. There's a discussion, I think, to be had around that. And the last one, I think, really is around ensuring that we understand what actions are being taken to make course corrections to those performance figures, and that we are taking lessons from other authorities. Is that correct?
Yes, because we have some reasons and performance improvements are given to us. For example, with the housing benefits, which we've discussed before, and that was very helpful when we did a deep dive. But it just is a picture here of us performing less well than our colleagues, period after period. And, other people in the same environment, what are we doing differently from them? There must be learnings there. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Officer Wiltshire.
Thank you. Yes, I can just answer the first question. Yeah, just to give a bit of background, this headline benchmarking report, this was the first report recommended by the committee to look at benchmarking data. So this is one that's very much owned by the committee, and they can choose what data sets come in and out of this. So this is actually not strictly related to the corporate plan. Since then, we've obviously worked closely with the committee to improve the data reporting with the corporate plan. So we've now put benchmarking into the performance measures, and obviously do the contextual measure report. We did decide to separate the reporting because this obviously headline report is independent of the corporate plan. But I wonder whether it would be a suggestion when we have the contextual measures and other measures for the corporate plan, whether to review the headline report, because this might not be needed in the future if there's appropriate and a thorough amount of data sets in the new corporate plan. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Adams.
Well, I just wanted to say that was rather unfair, I think, from Victoria, because you can see actually against many of those, the direction of change is positive. Some of the data sets are quite old. There's not the data. Some of the measures we previously discussed time and time again, I don't want to labour the point too much, aren't particularly relevant. I suppose you could say in that they're not good measures of how we're doing. So, we've talked time and time again about the rate of births of new enterprises per 10,000 people, sorry. And obviously we know we've got a much older demographic here. And we talked about waste, and Norfolk as a whole, unfortunately, does not do recycling well. It's good that Norfolk is moving in the right direction. Going to take a long time to really get us to where we want to be. And a different example entirely is the planning performance is often derided at full council meetings and in political literature. But the planning performance of this authority is exemplary. It's really good. And that's there, well, not just in black and white, but in green. So I just, wanted to rebut that. I felt I needed to, because it's not necessarily fair to say that's what's happening here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to respond to that, Councillor?
I think that's a very reasonable criticism, but the periods are quite long. I mean, we're talking about 6, 9, 12 periods. And so that strikes to me as a consistent pattern. And I know things are changing and improving, but this is what data is for, it to show you what's happening, basically. And to me, I just think that needs looking at. And if we can learn from our colleagues, surely that's a very good thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Got Councillor Shires and then Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just a question for Lucy, actually. On page 123, 6 for 8. 123.
Okay.
Where we've got the measure for 6 for 8 and the current period of data is 3 years ago. Do we know when we're going to see newer data? Because I don't know how we can compare where we are now to where we were without having the data. So I take the point about learning from neighbours. I'm more than happy to do that. But if we don't know where we are now, learning where we were 3 years ago feels like it's not going to be as beneficial without having up-to-date data.
Yeah, with that data set, there has been a delay due to the draft accounts and the short of resources. And that meant the statutory return wasn't submitted, and that's where the data comes from for this report. Yeah, sadly, with some of these data sets, there is that delay, which does make it a bit hard to look at it. We're usually looking about a year. Not all of them, some of them are quarterly and monthly, but we're usually looking at about a year delay for the data to come through. But then it is really useful seeing that data against the other local authorities. But the Director of Resources might have something to add on that data set. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Cushing.
A couple, I just comment. I think Councillor Holiday's point's well made. I think what we can learn from neighbours, or anyone else, that relates back to the point I made earlier, would certainly be beneficial. The question I have actually is a point of clarification, if I may. On page 123, we've got SIPFA 9.A and SIPFA 9.B, and there's only a very slight difference between the two. One is population age 16 and above, and one age 16 to 64. Quite understand why we need both of them in there, and actually seems to be quite a difference in the metrics between the two of them. Just wondered why that was.
It's very different.
Yeah, we kept them both in because that was discussed at the last committee. When we discussed the report, we were unsure whether you wanted both of them or just one of them. But the data sets are due to be reviewed in the next review, which is October, and that'll be after the data sets have been decided for the corporate plans. So that'll probably be quite a good time to look at the data sets again.
Okay.
I just wanted to also say, the number of people in terms of 9A is obviously a bit bigger than 9B, so the data sets will obviously look differently there. But the committee itself, decides which of these data sets it looks at, and I think need to have a bit of a wider scope next time, because I think they were sort of dead ends, really. That certainly was in terms of the new enterprises per 10,000 population, just essentially because North Norfolk's population skews that figure. I'm afraid to say you're not going to get lots of older retired people setting up businesses, and that's just the fact of it. And why would they? They're retired. So it's I feel a challenge for the future for this committee, really, to pick a wider scope, if that's okay. Thank you.
Councillor Holiday.
Can I slightly take issue with the thought of people over 64 wanting to do something new? As someone who's quite well over 64 and knowing people in my village who are over 64 who are doing new things, I don't think this is a dead end at all. I think it's a very vibrant economy we have with people moving in who want to do new things. So I don't think we should drop this simply because all retirees want to sit in a deck chair and play golf all day.
Can I just back on that? Because I don't think that's what I said at all, but when we're not going to set a specific measure to look at the working activities of retired people, are we? And I think, you know, maybe that's what we're getting into now. So this is why I don't think it was a good measure. North Norfolk's economy is wonderfully vibrant, and we've all sorts of different things going on the coast, inland, obviously, tourism, food production, and many, you know, wonderful things. But it's I just don't think that was a particularly good measure of that. Is what I'm trying to say to you. Thank you.
Okay, that's your opinion, Mr. Black.
I accept Councillor Holliday's comments, but this report takes reference from national data sets. And whilst I absolutely recognise there are lots of people over the age of 64 in North Norfolk that may want to do new things beyond the age of 64, including run a business, that data set isn't one that is collected at a national level such that we're able to reflect that. And I think that does highlight the fact that in many of these data sets, there is local variance and context which you have to discuss and understand, because one size does not fit all, and we won't score well on some indicators because of our geography, because of our demography, but we will on other indicators. And so you have to see all of these things not in isolation but set against a context. And it is always appropriate to think, how can we work better? But sometimes, you know, those constraints or the context in which we work will mean that we will never be top performance. And I think the waste figures show why that is. And I think that, you know, as a rural county and a rural district, and Councillor Holliday made reference to the Rural Services Network at the Local Government Association conference last week, I attended a session with the Rural Services Network, and it is a fact that rural districts and rural counties receive less per head of population for a whole range of service provision than metropolitan authorities, and have that challenge of geography and place and distance and accessibility and independent travel, and, you know, other the travel consequences that young people face in terms of getting to post-16 education. All of those things are context of our place, and we have to respond to that by the services which we provide, and it isn't a level playing field.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that's probably recognised. Councillor Tory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is this committee's selection of things that they want to monitor. Just my thoughts around it were I guess, analytical, because I've liked performance indicators and data. Been doing it since I was in the Air Force, and they told me it couldn't be done for an air defence radar. I set a set of performance indicators, and they use them today. But it's about the contextual, which Officer Black's touched on. We've just talked about a corporate plan. Our corporate plan gives us a focus. What is the focus of our SIP for nearest neighbours? They may be more focused in areas than we are. So again, there is the data. Yes, we would love to see everything green, and I agree with that. And we would like to know where we're moving. But how does that fit with the focus for each authority as well? Because they may be more focused on something else, whereas we're focused on something we may be doing better than them. So I just thought I'd raise that as an observation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shires, I saw your hand raised. Not sure whether it's still current.
No, it was just, I guess the only way to look at SIP for 9A would be to encourage our over 64s to start businesses, because that's the only way we're going to push the data back. And I don't believe that that is possibly where our older generation would want to invest their time. I'm not speaking on behalf of our older generation, obviously, but I'm not sure whether or not that would be something that our economic development team would want to do to make that orange or yellow or green or whatever colour we would want it to be, for it to adequately reflect the aspirations of the benchmarking. That's all I can get from that data set, more so. That was all I wanted to add.
Okay. Any other comments? There is the matter of how you want to see these reports, whether you want to see them all three together, whether you want to see them restructured in some other way.
So I think, Chair, there is merit in the performance and contextual ones being brought together so that they are seen in the same place. The reporting against your corporate plan objectives is, as we've talked about before, more around progress around marking your own homework, if you like. So you could take that one separately, but the benchmarking and the context would be, or would have merit in being presented together. Because the performance report on your corporate plan is what we're doing against our stated objectives of, do we have a rural strategy? Have we delivered a solar carport at the reef? The other two things are benchmarking against national performance and the context to allow you to make those decisions.
Any comments on that? Are you happy to run with that?
Can you just run that by me again? Which are going to go together?
So you have three performance reports which are brought to you in a quarterly basis. You have a performance report which has essentially reported progress against the corporate plan objectives, of which there were many under the previous corporate plan, and we are looking at refining and making those clearer and more concise, and progress against delivering particular actions that are in your annual action plan. That is almost marking your own homework, reporting on the progress that we're making in delivering against those corporate plan objectives and actions. You've then got the benchmarking report, which is the SIP for family report, or North or East of England report, which does say where we are in terms of our business as usual core service delivery against some nationally indicators based on government returns to government, how many planning applications, speed of determination, benefit processing, volume of waste collected. Those are in that basket of benchmarking issues, which we can have influence over and which you can legitimately challenge us around. Can we do better? Is the resource in the right place? And all of those sort of things. There is then this report, which is the duration of the time, or the time of measurement context is over longer periods, and it is more contextual. So what is our rate of unemployment? And if we go back to the comments earlier, what is the trend analysis? Why are we in or out of trend? And where does that sit with our health indicators, our accessibility, levels of participation in post-16 education, skills and qualifications, health outcomes because of age? All of those are contextual.
Thank you. Yes, that's brilliant. But yeah, I was just thinking there is some confusion with the title. So I refer to this as the headline benchmark report because they're all very similar. So maybe when we review the reports, we might want to consider what we call it as well, just to make sure they're clear and which one goes with which. So I see this one as very much overview of Scrutiny's committee report, which they've got their own handle over and choose what data sets go in it.
Does that clarify the situation?
Well, I think they really should all be seen together, actually, so that you've got the argument and the counter argument and the balance, so that you can actually get everything in perspective. If people could bear to see them, now that we're doing it online, we don't have great bodges of paper.
All three together.
All three together. That's what I would like to see.
How does others view that?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. It makes no difference to me. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So are we happy to run with that? I'm seeing more nods than shakings of heads. So, okay. So for the future, we will see them in one further point.
Yeah, my other question was, are we going to look in at these other areas where we're lagging our SIP for colleagues? Look at what the colleagues are doing. Is there a piece of work there, as well as having the reports together, which is smashing? Thank you very much.
Councillor Adams.
Well, can I just sort of talk in context of the previous item with the corporate plan? You've obviously got an opportunity there to review, the measures you are looking at against the corporate plan. We've talked quite a bit about the data sets there. I did also want to point out the notes on the data sets, and really grateful to Lucy for producing that, because there is quite a lot of information hidden behind the numbers in the report. And I just think you've got to take the opportunity to look at a wider range of measures from across the council, both that I suppose where we might be performing very well and what can we learn from that, and obviously where we're not, but certainly across a wide enough range of services. So I just think that opportunity is imminent. So it's perhaps not the time for the discussion on those individual measures. I don't know, that's up to you as a committee.
Can I just add in there, I think what in my discussions with the performance management officer, she has essentially said, as was noted today during discussion of the draft corporate plan, is that the performance measures for the corporate plan haven't been chosen yet. It may be that the things that you want to look into, Victoria, do appear in the corporate plan, in which case they will become part of the key performance report on the corporate plan, and then we can look at them in more detail. But as Tim was just saying, it's probably a good idea to wait until those performance measures are put in place before we look to address those points.
And presumably there'll be an opportunity during the workshops for that to be put forward. That's another avenue, isn't it? Okay, right. With that in mind, the recommendation is to receive and note the headline benchmarking data for the council compared with the SIPTA benchmarking, and decide whether to take any action, no action, or make recommendations to Cabinet. There are no recommendations to Cabinet, although we have had discussions on some changes that we would like to see, and there are ways in which we will achieve that in the future. So can I have a proposer and a seconder then, please, for this report? Councillor Fisher, Councillor Penfold. Can I have a show of hands then to accept the report, receive the report and note the contents? Thank you. Right, that's unanimous. Moving on to the next item, which is the Cabinet Work Programme, item 14.
Yeah, I would just bring members' attention to the fact that there is an enormous amount of work coming forward to Cabinet in September, one of which was deferred at the last meeting. So that was the Marham's Bowls Club, which the committee might have an interest in. You've also got work coming forward on the Cedars, Tennis Club, Stalham Sports Centre, the Rocket House. And then in addition, we have reports that were delayed in June. So you'll have the debt management annual report coming forward. That will, of course, come to overview and scrutiny as well. And then we'll be back round at the managing performance report, although that still won't have the updated measures by that point, I expect. There is also a coastwise update. It has been suggested that could come to overview and scrutiny as well. I do note that we also have a very full agenda in September, so we may need to move some items around if we want to fit that in or receive it at a later date. That's everything I have on the Cabinet Work Programme. I will just note actually that we're potentially expecting the MTFS in November. I think the previous 2 or 3 years we've had the MTFS at the same time as the budget. I think it is beneficial to get that well in advance of the budget, so hopefully we'll see it's listed there for scrutiny in November as well.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on the Cabinet Work Programme? Right, moving on to the committee in more detail.
Yeah, so in terms of the overview and scrutiny work programme, just note something that's been discussed at previous meetings. We are receiving an update on the planning service improvement plan at the next meeting in September. That refers to, I think, the Director for Place and Climate Change wants to split out the update from the statutory consultees, and then at a later date give a kind of a wider update on the implementation of the planning service improvement plan. So one of the key things I think that scrutiny requested at the start of that was to consult with statutory consultees. So that's the update we'll receive in September. Alongside that, there is also a 6-monthly enforcement board update that we'll expect. we've got performance measuring, monitoring in September. So whether we have those three reports together now, we'll need to look to bring together, as mentioned, the debt management report. Then just going forward to October, I note that we have got the ambulance response times and dentistry services points on there. I have got a meeting with Lucy this afternoon to review or discuss how we review the ambulance response times data and see if we can improve the way that we get that from E-East and perhaps make it more digestible. Something that is apparent with ambulance response times data. We've been looking at that for, is it about two years now, something like that. And members will know as a district council, that's not something we have, we don't have a health responsibility. However, it does affect our residents. So we look at that. The concern is, and we can continue to monitor the data, the concern is, I suppose, that as a district council, we don't have many ways that we can impact that. So we might want to consider when we're looking at the data, what we want to do going forward, whether that's something we continue to monitor, knowing that we won't be able to impact it greatly. There's also items going forward. Anglian Water has been penciled in for November as well, so we'll start looking at making those arrangements. And that's everything, I think, from the overview and scrutiny work programme, unless there's any questions. I note that there was a meeting requested on the North Walsham High Streets Heritage Action Zone project at the last meeting, which I think is still to take place, but should be coming soon.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's probably fair to say that there'll have to be a bit of an agenda management, I think, in months September, October and November. So we may have to make some changes around that in order to make the meetings manageable. So we'll see how that works out, though. There may be some things happen between now and then. Any comments, Mr. Blatch?
I accept the point that you make, Chair, but we've sat here today and we've talked about the council's ambition, its strategic direction, and what we want to achieve for our communities. And then there's a comment that there's, the agenda proposed for cabinet in September is too heavy. If you want to be ambitious, if you want to see us make progress on sound asset management, commercialisation, respond to government consultations, engage in county deals, all of those things, that is the work of the council. And then you need to prioritise where ONS needs to engage with that agenda, because outside of this building, the world goes on and they won't wait for us. And if we want to be ambitious around levelling up, if we want to do better for our communities, we have to make space in our time to do all of those things. And it might be that you have to prioritise your agendas or look at whether you use working groups or task and finish groups if you want to cover that ground. Because I think, as you've acknowledged, the agenda is huge and you're going to have to pick which issues you want to be involved in and at what level. And that includes holding both the council and cabinet to account internally, but also other public bodies externally to the authority which deliver services here in our communities, because those issues are real and they do affect our communities on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thank you for that. Hence my comment that we do need to actively manage our agendas, and priorities will be the governing factor. We have to make some difficult decisions at certain times, but there are options there in which will enable us perhaps to gain a bit of capacity. And we did mention working groups last time, and we've done that before. So that will be, I think, something that we will certainly give consideration to, but I don't see any point of having meetings which have got unmanageable agendas. Right, okay, any comments on those? Are you happy, are you content to accept those work programs with the comments that have been made? We've got some challenges ahead, undoubtedly, and it's for us to manage those. Right, okay, then that is the last item on our agenda. So I will formally